I'm delighted to get this event started. We're beaming from the Evergreen State College. It's April 28th, and this is our public seminar on transformative responses to harm. I wanted to begin the day with a solemn acknowledgement of stolen land, stolen labor, and stolen lives. The Evergreen State College is situated on territory that was dispossessed, stolen from Indigenous people. Those of us who reside in the southernmost reach of the Salish Sea are living on the ancestral lands of the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes, which include the Squaxin Island tribe, the Nisqually Indian tribe, and the Puyallup tribe of Indians. The 1854 treaty ceding these lands has been the subject of incredible struggle and resistance, and also of unprecedented transformation. These treaty tribes all still reside in this area and are actively engaged with the land and their communities. All who are not Indigenous are visitors here. We recognize the traditional custodians of these lands and pay respect to elders past and present. We celebrate Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination and acknowledge that there is much work to be done in this respect. I also want to acknowledge stolen labor. Not everybody who is not from here came here voluntarily. Many people, including many people of color and particularly Black people, had their labor stolen from them as part of the process of building the culture we live in right now. We also need to remember that many women of all races had and still have their care work, their labor of social reproduction taken for granted. I wish to acknowledge these labors and propose that we never forget the sacrifice that so rarely is included in history books, even as it lives on in communities that continue to bear the brunt of these histories. And I want to acknowledge stolen lives. Lives ended too soon by what Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls an unequal distribution of premature death. I want to pay homage in particular to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others who have died prematurely as a consequence of ongoing mob and state violence. We started to hear it said about 5 years ago as part of the movement for Black lives, and we may need to remind ourselves for a little while yet. When Black lives matter, everybody lives better. When Black lives matter, everybody lives better. So I'm really excited about today's public seminar on transformative responses to harm, and so very grateful to all of you for being here this morning. We've got 70 participants. I know people often like to know how many people are in this room with me. We've got 70 right now. I expect that number might tick up as the event proceeds. Today's event, hosted by Reimagining Community Safety, is part of a series of public seminars that are designed to showcase Evergreen's ongoing commitment to action-oriented, community-based, interdisciplinary inquiry. Each event brings together a dynamic panel of contemporaries to engage in what early Evergreen faculty member Richard Solarius called urgent studies. The point with urgent studies is not just to do things in a rush, but rather, as Solarius puts it, to focus and legitimize research on solutions. So I can think of no better constellation of contemporaries than the ones we have with us today. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with Shaka Colon, Sean Good, and Danielle Sered, who are representing the work of Common Justice and Choose 180. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. I did want to thank our co-sponsors for today's event. The President's Equity Fund and the Justice Involved Student Group made this event possible. And special thanks also to Julie Ron and to Raoul Berman and the media interns for keeping the digital ship sailing smoothly. Aaliyah Brown of Common Justice was an incredible partner in organizing our event. Two short announcements. We've got an art lecture next week, same place, same time, with Cassie Thornton, focused on the poetics of mutual aid. And then the next event in the public seminar series is on May 15th. We'll be talking about mass incarceration and liberation education. And so with that, I think we'll get this event started. And I guess I can say, let's call the panelists on stage, however we do that in this Zoom world with the spotlighting. Our format will be, I'll facilitate a kind of Q&A, but then we're really putting a premium on exchange between the panelists, some of whom know each other, some of whom might be meeting for the first time, or well, we did have a preparatory meeting a few weeks ago, but this is the first time I'm seeing all of us together like this. So welcome Danielle, welcome Shaka, welcome Sean. It's really great to have you guys here at Evergreen, and so grateful for the work you do. And the first question I'm gonna set in motion here, and I think the order that we'll proceed in is with Sean, and then Danielle, and then Shaka. The first question is to invite you to introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, and then tell us a little bit about your work. What are you working on? A question that came up with students that we worked on a few weeks ago is, where are you coming from, and where are you going? You get to respond however you see fit. Take it away, Sean.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Good. Most important, I'm married to the most amazing woman in the world. She's my gift from God, my angel from heaven, the love of my life, the woman of my dreams. I have two teenage children. One of them's a college freshman. The other one is a 8th grader who will be going into 9th grade, who's becoming incredibly proficient at TikTok during this pandemic. In fact, like taught me something new that I should have known, but like I'll be short. Like she showed me this picture on TikTok of an infant skull. And like for the first time in my life, I was like 1 week ago older or younger, where I realized that we had all of our teeth in our skull the entirety of this time. Now it makes perfect sense, right? But when you see a picture of this, it looks like something straight up out of an alien movie. But you know, the things you can learn from TikTok. And I steward a nonprofit organization called Choose 180 as our executive director. And on the side, I'm a connoisseur of dad jokes, which we might get into later because it's one of my favorite places to be. And where am I coming from, and where am I going? I don't really have a ton of respect for yesterday. I stay pretty present in the moment that's now, and with the trauma that I've had the privilege to live through, I'm incredibly grateful for the miracle of today. And so I'm coming from today and honored by the opportunity to serve. And I'm leaning aspirationally into the hope of tomorrow and the possibilities that exist therein. So thanks again for creating the space for me to be here. I'm honored to be a part of this panel.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Danielle Sarad. I'm the Executive Director of Common Justice in Brooklyn, New York. We develop and advance solutions to violence that meet the needs of those harmed, advance racial equity, and don't rely on incarceration. I am the parent of a just last week turned 2-year-old. And so learning all the lessons that 2-year-olds teach you, including the ways in which restorative justice practices are available to us, like even at that age. Where I'm coming from and where I'm going, one of the songs I sing to my kid, which I won't sing because he is the only living human who likes my singing voice, and that's because I made him in my body. But it's like, your name is, and you come from the blank. And we would sing it over and over again and list all these different people and places and like origins for him. And so I understand, like, we come from our own ancestors. Like, I come from my ancestors. I come from Chicago. I come from all the people who chose to teach me, to protect me, to challenge me, to raise me when my blood family couldn't. I come from my blood family deeply, from my chosen family now. I come from Brooklyn, where I have been for 20 years. I come from the movement that I am a part of and the people I answer to in that movement. I come from like all the people I have ever decided to be answerable to in my life. And from the people who came long before me, who built things I did not know, could not see, but benefit from every day. And where I'm going is like, I'm going where we're going, right? In the sense that I understand that there is nothing that I want to see change in my life that I will be able to do alone, or that Common Justice will be able to do alone. And so our job is to be in relationship, to be in sync, to be in movement with others who are seeking a world where everybody thrives, where everybody is free, where everybody can meet their basic needs, where repair is possible, all of those things. But I'm going where we're going. And I have the huge privilege day in and day out of working with Shaka Cologne, which is one of the big delights of my job that I get to share with all of you today. So I'll pass it to Shaka.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shaka Cologne. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Currently living in Harlem right now. So people try to tell me I'm from Harlem now. I don't really understand that, but born and raised Brooklyn, repping that every day. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm an intervention manager with Common Justice. I work with our harm party participants, and I help them to get through the programs, to get through the curriculum that they work on every day, and to help them to be able to get to these places that they should be in life, as far as stability, getting helping them to get a job, helping them to pretty much find their own power, which leads me to where I am and where I want to go. I'll come from a place of power. I like what Danielle and what Sean say. We all come from ancestry, and I respect my ancestry, and I know our ancestry is power, which is why I love doing this job that I do now, because I get to remind participants every day of the power that they have, the power that's always in them, the power that's instilled in them, and they remind me every day in return of the power that I have, not only to help them, but to continue to help myself to grow, learn, and mature. Because we're all going through a journey. It's not just me helping them. It's the same thing, vice versa. I get as much, love and support from them as they do from me. Thank you.
So wonderful. Thank you. I think I should participate as well. I am coming from rest and I am going to work. I love this work in particular, and I'm so grateful that we get to spend some time together this afternoon, because all you guys are on the East Coast, even though Sean, you're based in Seattle. I think a follow-up question, and I would also invite you guys to engage with each other. It would be great to hear some more detail about Choose 180 and about Common Justice, and in any order, but just so what is the organization and what does it do? Tell us a little bit about the work.
I'm happy to start big picture on Common Justice and then kick it to Shaka to talk about what it looks like kind of day in and day out. So we do a lot of things at Common Justice. We are engaged in strategic communications to try and shift the narrative about violence in our country, who commits it, who's harmed by it, what actually produces safety, how we can get there. We do policy and organizing work where we work to elevate the power of the people most directly impacted by violence, including most centrally crime survivors, in fighting for the solutions that they want, which we know when you actually listen to survivors are almost never more punishment. And then at the core of our work, the thing we've been doing since 2008 is the first and only alternative to incarceration in the adult criminal justice system in America to focus on serious and violent felonies. So we apply a restorative justice model to those cases. If and only if both the DA and the victim in the case say yes, the person who committed harm is diverted into a process where they go through extensive preparation with our intervention team. They sit in a circle, a restorative justice circle, with the person they've harmed, where they reach agreements about how to make things as right as possible. And then they spend that next year going through our violence intervention curriculum and fulfilling those agreements, which take the vast majority of their waking hours to do. Like we will say, we will never diminish a person's dignity, but we will decimate their social lives if we have to. Like the demands on them are substantial. And we believe deeply that when people cause harm, they owe an obligation, but that obligation isn't to the state. The obligation is to those that they hurt. And we believe people who cause harm have in them the inherent dignity and power that enables them to contribute to that repair. And similarly, we believe that survivors deserve to have their pain acknowledged, deserve to have a say in what should be done about their pain, and deserve the kind of support that helps them heal through that and transform. And so a lot of the day-to-day work, which I'll pass it to Shaka to describe, is about, like with our responsible parties, is about the development of their insight, their accountability, their self-love, all of that. And we know that that is in the service, not only of their own development, but also in the service of the public safety. And so I'll pass it to you, Shaka, to talk about what we actually do.
Thank you, Danielle. So pretty much every day when I meet up with participants on Mondays through Fridays, is the schedule we have for them. We will start off with a 5-day schedule when they first start off with us. But before that, like I actually get to meet the participants that I get to work with. Just we see who they are, we see where they're coming from. They talk to us about the situation that transpired that pretty much made and help that pretty much contributed to them ending up with us in the first place. We have that meeting, we talk about it, and we pretty much see what are you capable of acknowledging right now as far as like the pain that you harm to the person. And that's where we start. And pretty much like if we do decide to accept this person when they do become like my client at a point, we get into the prep curriculum where we talk about like some of the pain that they've actually probably might have experienced, some things that their family might have experienced. We explore so many different things where it becomes like, you're not just this person who's harmed somebody, you're a person who's been harmed. And the harm that you've suffered at some point in your life that may not have been acknowledged, that we're acknowledging right now, it comes full circle, and you realize that it attributes to the decision that you made for us ending up here, for you ending up here with us. So that's pretty much what the curriculum does. So you get to that prep curriculum, you break that down, you break down the harm that they caused, you break down the harm that their family felt. You get into after that, you get into the circle after you do the prep phase. And once you get in the circle, that's when if the harm party comes, if they decide to be in a circle, then you're there with the person you actually harmed. Usually we have like a talking stick within that circle. So if it gets a little bit dicey, or like we don't want people talking over each other, we have something which is really cool called a talking stick, that the participant actually gets to make themselves. So something that they feel comfortable with, something that they feel kind of like a bond with, and it kind of just makes them feel more comfortable in the process. So we pass that stick around, and if the harm party didn't want to come, we have a surrogate come in for them, and that's someone who's actually probably like experienced something like a similar situation to the harm party, and they actually met with the harm party, so they understand how the harm party feels about this. So we'd have a surrogate come in for them if the harm party doesn't want to come in. And also these people get to bring support people, which is very important. So like, you can have like your mom or like your friend or whoever you feel comfortable to come in, just like give you that moral support you need, as well as the harm party. So that's like also a very good piece. So once, you get through that circle phase, you get you on what's called like the agreements. And that's collective ideas that everyone within the circle, they came up with together. As, like Danielle said, you have to show sorry. Saying sorry is one thing, but you got to show sorry, which is why the circle is so important and why these agreements are so important, because these agreements are what everyone agreed with. This is how you can show sorry. So we're going from that place of saying to showing. Then after that, we pretty much is working on agreements. We have a move group where we talk about all these other groups, LGBTQ, the harm that they're dealt, the struggles that they're dealt, the harm that we go through in our own communities, Black and Brown communities. We talk about all these things within that group as well. So they're attending the move group. They got the agreements, and at the same time, after the circle, they're doing the another part of the curriculum, which is called the post curriculum. So like at that point, you're focusing on that. That's kind of like when their days go down a little bit. They don't check in with me as much, but you're working on those agreements. And anything else, we also have like a stability day, like I talked about before. Another piece that's very important that I work with them on is after you leave the program, we got to make sure you're stable. You got to make sure you have a job you can go to. You got to make sure you have skills that you're able to rely on, so you don't go back to these other things that may get you into trouble. So these are all the things that I work with the harm party on. We talk about the harm is caused. We work on personal skills for them to move forward, and we work on these agreements together so that we're able to show sorry and they're able to understand everything that's transpired and like why they're doing these things.
I just wanted that awkward silence. No, I just thought we should sit for a second and just like ponder the significance of that work. And really, the folks that are listening, I really would encourage you to begin to internalize some of the semantics that are being used, because it's all intentional, right? Like people with victims, right? Like to transition from using words like victims to harm party, right? And you'll hear more of that as both of us share the work of our collective causes, all right, as all of us do. You'll really begin to pick some of that up, and I really challenge you to listen for the intentionality of it all. Our organization exists to transform systems of injustice while supporting the young people who are disproportionately impacted by those systems. That's really important to us because we believe that we shouldn't exist, and that we're actively working towards a future where we are no longer in existence, because the harm shouldn't be there to necessitate our presence in community in the first place. But as long as these systems of injustice continue to function in the way that they do, then it necessitates having organizations like ours to act as a buffer. But what that means is we have to be in as an intentional relationship with the system folks as we are with community. And in those intentional relationships, offer the same level of grace both to the system partners as we do to our community members. Because one thing that Choose 180 and it stands on is that grace selectively applied is actually favoritism, right? And so the minute that we begin to play favorites, we begin to other the other, and by virtue of doing that, become the very thing that we despise, and ultimately find ourselves in juxtaposition to ourselves, wondering how did we get here in the first place. And our work began in 2011 in partnership with the King County District Attorney. Essentially, Dan Satterberg reached out to community leader Doug Wheeler and said, "We're failing Black and brown children, can you help?" And Doug leaned in, and the two of them collaboratively created what at that time was called the 180 program, which began as a pre-filing diversion program, which essentially means this: when young people live in neighborhoods that are overly policed and their behavior is criminalized and are Black and brown, which is what they are disproportionately, police send those referrals to the prosecutor. The prosecutor historically sends those same referrals to the court, and then the court then adjudicates the case and determines how criminal the adolescent's behavior really was. Because of our unique relationship in the infancy of the cause, the prosecutors would send that referral to community, so young people would get us instead of a courtroom and receive grace instead of guilt. And between 2011 and 2016, we supported 12 to 17-year-olds through this process, and on average served a couple hundred a year. When I took over stewardship of the cause in January of 2017, we began to serve young adults. The city attorney in Seattle reached out and said, "Would this thing work for 18 to 24-year-olds?" To which I replied, "Of course it will." I mean, we didn't know, but like we all know, nothing magical happens at 18, right? Like you don't flip the switch at 18, all of a sudden you have like this new mantle of maturity that you're carrying forward, right? Like you're still making poor decisions. I could testify to my 19-year-old, God bless him, he's smart, he's wise, but he's still 19. And so we began to serve 18 to 24-year-olds as well. And between the 12 to 24-year-olds that we serve in this particular method, 90% of them don't return to the criminal legal system within 12 months of engaging in our programming. Now, when I say that number, people are often taken aback and they're like, "Wow, that's great." And I think it's cool. And I love to say it's because we got the secret sauce. It's our rich curriculum. It's because we employ people with lived experience, much like myself, that get it, that functionally understand it, and can translate it in a way that's culturally appropriate for the folks who we're able to support and serve. All of that's true. But at the most base level, their behavior didn't need to be criminalized in the first place in order to get the support they needed in community to really commit to a new direction for their life. They just needed some people who could see them as they are, elevate them as a possibility to be developed and not a problem to be solved. And because we function out of this lens, we're always looking to get into critical places where we can help young people pause, pivot, and commit to a new direction. It started out with this pre-filing diversion work that I explained. It expanded to schools where young people are being disproportionately suspended and expelled for what's the equivalent of insubordinate behavior. And like, for God's sake, how many of y'all who are a teenager and were not insubordinate at one given time or another? But when Black and brown youth are insubordinate, they're also being insubordinate and aged 4 to 4.5 years older than what they actually are. And as a result, you can have a sixth grader sitting in a classroom being looked at like they're a grown adult when they're talking back to a teacher, simply operating out of their adolescence and doing what's behaviorally appropriate for their age. Thus, they end up suspended and expelled and going home to what and to who? That's why our organization began to partner with schools to create an off-ramp from that process into a community-based restorative practice that allows them to be seen whole and full and create the space for them to re-engage the classroom setting with the tools that they need to successfully thrive. Young people from that point said, "We want something to do during the summer," so we launched a summer internship program. We all know about the social unrest that's been happening over the past 14, 15 months, really longer than that. If you've been in the thing for about that long, if you jumped on the thing. And our young people wanted to know, what do we do beyond the protests? So we launched an advocacy program where we're resourcing 28 young people and developing their own advocacy platform in the communities that they love, live, and thrive in. And that is the continual nature of our work and the continual effort of our cause. finding unique positions to amplify young people as possibilities and not problems. I'll leave with this one really cool thing that happened recently, because it's not just about us and our organization. We're constantly looking to build coalition with others because we believe there's no greater power than the collective us. And recently, we rolled out a program in partnership with Creative Justice, Collective Justice, and Community Passageways. Lots of C's in this conversation we're having today. Sorry, you'll get lost in it. But in this program we rolled out, it's called Restorative Community Pathways. And this really special, unique thing that we built in community for community is building an off-ramp to up to 800 young people out of the juvenile system in about 3 years. We are getting to the point where community-based models are alleviating the need for that criminal legal system altogether and creating a direct pathway for young people to get access to communities instead of courtrooms. All this is possible because the power of the collective us, and because work like this is being brought before you today is demonstrating that it's not just successful for those who have been accused of causing harm, but it's also much more transformative for those that have been harmed, because it actually honors the collective voice of those that need it the most.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Just incredible to hear the detail of the work, the scope of it, the passion that you bring to it. And I'll actually pause to see whether there was any follow-ups that you guys wanted to do with each other. I think you heard a lot. Sean, you heard a lot about common justice. Danielle and Shaka, you've just heard a lot about Choose 180. And I wonder if there are any follow-up questions that might have emerged. Fair enough. Let me ask another question that comes out of our question bank, which is, what brings you to this work, and what do you bring to this work? And as we did before, you can answer however you see fit. Why don't we start off with, we'll go to Danielle.
So I came of age in Chicago in the late 80s and early 90s, when Shaka was getting ready to get born. And, um, and it was at a time of really extraordinarily high levels of violence. It was in the throes of what people call the crack epidemic, but we also now understand is the time in our nation's history that mass incarceration was escalating to a pace never before known in all of human history. Like in any nation ever in all of human history, no country has locked up as many of its own as we do. And we were starting to do that then. And the convergence of that, caused a great deal of pain, right? So I saw people who were incarcerated sort of disappear because of all the shame and stigma around that for families. I think like very often they just like went down south and people were sort of silent about what that was until people came home. People came home almost always worse for it. I believe the thing prison targets in each of us is like anyone who's there is like the thing in me that suffers when Sean feels pain, right? Like that fundamental connection that we have that I think prison is systematically designed to sever. And so some people can withstand that. Those people are extraordinary. They are the best among us of anywhere. But most of us can't sustain that kind of continuous violence against the thing in us that binds us to one another. And so most people who came home were worse for having been there. The evidence would, like the criminological literature would describe prison as criminogenic, which means you're more likely to commit more harm if you go than if you don't go, even if you committed the same crime at the beginning. And then I also saw all the pain of survivors. I experienced a lot of violence myself. I committed violence myself. I lost one of my best friends to murder. I lost many people I knew to murder. I buried more people before I was 18 than I should bury in a lifetime. And saw that pain crystal clear. I saw that a lot of that same incarceration was being carried out in victims' names. But when I looked at my own survivorship, at the survivorship around me, the other people, almost no one was calling for prison. And even those who were calling for prison, if they got it, it did not heal them. Like, this is not a moral judgment or political judgment. It's like a physiological judgment. As humans, we are not built to heal because someone else suffers. It doesn't work. Like, it's not like if you go to the doctor with a broken arm, they don't bring someone in and break that person's arm and then you walk out fine, right? Like, we are not healed by another's pain. And I think there are religious teachings that say that, there are moral teachings, there are political lessons, but there's also just a basic lesson of the human body that watching someone else hurt does not change our hurt. And so I saw that very clearly. And then because, to Sean's point, because I was a teenager, I was an idiot. And I did foolish things, and I did that partly, I say that facetiously because it's true. And I also did things as like my family was going through a lot of pain, a lot of loss, a lot of complicated things that I was like unable to fully process as a person, as a young person. I didn't have what I needed to hold all of that. And I was an adolescent, so I was foolish. And when I got in the most serious trouble I got in, that court system met me with a lot of grace. I think the judge saw me as someone who could be his daughter, saw me as somebody who made a mistake, wondered what had happened to me that I did that. I left with 6 months of community service. My co-defendant left with 6 years of hard time, young Black man. And it became really crystalline evident to me the way in which that system was fundamentally racist, the way that racism was baked into the system. And so it meant for me that, I was like, my job then is going to be to find people who are fighting this inequity, to join with them in that fight, and to fight until we win or I die, like whichever comes first. And so, in many ways, I think the thing I bring most to this work is stamina. That's what people who like me call it. People who dislike me call it stubbornness, or worse word, tenacity is sort of in between. Like, it's like if I'm on your side, it's stamina. I'm empowered. It depends on where you are. I don't think stamina is the word prosecutors use to talk about me most of the time. Love each other though we do, to Sean's point. But I think and I also, as a white person in this work, I bring like real clarity that as white people, one of the things that we know is that system is fully capable of mercy, like is fully capable of imposing reasonable sentences, that the actors in it have those choices available to them every time. Prosecutors can end mass incarceration tomorrow if they wanted to. They can dismiss any charge they want to dismiss until they get down to one that is associated with a sentence that they think is appropriate. Even if the legislator never passed a new law, prosecutors could end it tomorrow. It's not as though there was one set of laws for me and another for the co-defendant who appeared before that same judge several minutes later. And so I think one of the things we know as white people and can testify to is that like this world that we are talking about envisioning is not some like distant imagination. Like it is a set of criteria that is typically applied to us. Like when we commit harm, people are like, what happened to you? Not what's wrong with you. I have a very like multiracial chosen family. And I did an experiment many years ago where I asked all the kids in my family, like what detention meant. And every single one of the white kids said it's when you stay after school because you've been bad, version of that. And every single one of the kids of color in my extended family said it was baby jail. And so like we know how to treat people, how to treat children like children. Like the system has every tool it needs to exercise mercy when it chooses to. And I think in addition to putting our time on the line, our skill on the line, our privilege on the line, our lives on the line as white folks, one of the things that we can continuously do is call bullshit on any moment in which certain solutions are said to be impossible, because we have ample evidence in our own experience that they're not only possible but normalized for all of us.
Fantastic. Let's pass it to Shaka for this question. And you take it any way you want, but what brings you to this work and what do you bring to this work?
Thank you. So what brings me to this work actually is interesting. My origin with Common Justice started about 3 years ago. I was actually a participant in Common Justice myself. I was a harm party. Not to get into like what happened to me, but I did something very dumb, something that I should have been above. But we all fall victim to situations sometimes. So I got in a little legal situation, and I was looking at time, which is a very scary time for me and a very stressful time for me. So I was very just unsure about my future, and here comes Common Justice with my lawyer with this opportunity. Just, hey, I'm hearing about this program, called Common Justice. Is something you're interested in? I'm like, hey, I don't want to do that time they're talking about. Yeah, let's can I check it out? Like, what are they talking about? I go in, like I said, I do my intake with Common Justice, the same intake I was talking about earlier that I now do with participants. I did my intake, and by the grace of God, I always say, I got accepted. So that started pretty much like my year with Common Justice, which I had to complete the program. I had to do the prep curriculum, the circle, the agreements, the post curriculum, all that, move groups, all of that. I had to do all that stuff. And I don't know, as I was going through it, like I was working 2 kitchen jobs. So I was doing my morning kitchen job it was in Hell's Kitchen. So it was in Midtown, my morning kitchen job. And then I went to Brooklyn Atlantic to Common Justice. And then I go to, what was that? That was Bed-Stuy. I go to Bed-Stuy to my other kitchen job. So I do this every day, 5 days a week. That was my routine. So extremely exhausted, but just like, pushing through, trying to propel myself through. At the same time, like, my co-defendant was in the program, and also, a handful of other participants. And I don't know, like, we didn't talk a whole lot, but we still did have like a bond chip in which we wanted to push each other to make it through the program. If someone messed up and like someone was doing good, I noticed that sometimes they go up and try to, just help them to get through it. And I always appreciate that. And I noticed it, and I realized that it's something that, I always knew I was going to graduate, and I knew I was going to graduate within that year because I was very motivated at the time. But I noticed that not everybody had that kind of motivation, or some people just had so many other things going on in their lives that they couldn't really like get to that motivating point, to get to the program and do everything that they got to do consistently. So I kind of knew, like, when I was in the program, that, and I was tired of working in the kitchen. I've been done it for years. I've done it for years. I was tired. My wrist was hurting from making those salads every day, cutting. And I was tired. So I was like, I really like. I feel like this might be something that I might be able to do. I always feel like I was the type of person, even with my friends, like I played a therapist role by accident. Like I'm always asking people about their problems and stuff like that. So I just figured, like, once I get through this, I really want to be able to help people that are struggling with this. I want to be able to help people that are really not having as easy of a time getting through this as I am. This is something that I feel like I could, be motivating. And I feel like because I've gone through it, and because we're coming, like, I come from the hood too. I've been through it too. I lived in several hoods: Brownsville, Flatbush. I've lived in Crown Heights. I've lived all over. I've seen different things happen. I've seen different cultures, within the hood, but it's the same outcome every time. We all looked at the same. Like Danielle told us, the same injustices happening in, all the courts. So I just wanted to be a part of that change. I wanted to be someone that fought for us, that spoke up for us. When we take our clients to court, I just had a client that told, we had a court date, and then after the court date, he's like, "Shaka, thank you so much." And I'm like, what are you thanking me for? He's like, "I've been to programs before, but I never had anyone speak up for me in court like you did." And I'm just like, "Hey man, I'm just saying, like, what you did all the work, you doing the right thing. I'm just saying what I." He's like, no, thank you. Like, that means a lot. And I had to think about that, because, like, I didn't really understand, because in my head, like I said, you're just doing the right thing. I'm just reporting what you're doing. He's like, "No." I'm like, wow, like, and I hear that often from a lot of our participants. Like, they'll say, like, no, like, I even had like another participant, he'd been through several programs and he'd been going through his case for a long time. He was just tired of it. He'd been going through it for years, literally. And he had to come to us to, like, finally get this thing through. And it's like the same thing. It's like, man, like, thanks. Like, everyone else was trying to keep me in this thing. But, when I say in this thing, like, in this, just doo-doo that he was in, the mess that he was in, but y'all helped me get out, So that's what encourages me. What do I bring? Like I said, I bring my own experience of just being through the program, being a young Black man, surviving America every day. yeah, I feel like that's all I ever need to bring in. Also, just I feel like I bring my willingness to listen. Like, you know, even though I understand we all come from the same place and we all like the same people, we have our differences. And, you know, we have to learn to respect each other's differences and understand where each other's coming from. You know, be able to put each other put ourselves in each other's shoes. So I feel like I bring that too, just like understanding and listening when probably someone else didn't listen to them. And that was probably the whole problem in the first place. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
man. Shaka, man. Like I could listen to you just talk. You know what I mean? Like I love the lens that you operate out of, my friend. And I'm grateful that you've chosen to serve community in this way, because community is better because of that commitment. First, the commitment you made to yourself to be whole and to be healed, because you know people don't change, but they heal and become more who they've always purposed to be. So to be on that healing journey, but then to help others along that healing journey as well, man, that's transformative. So thank you for that. I began my journey in this work when I was 6. That was the first engagement I had with the criminal legal system. It's also the earliest memory I have of my brother, who at 13 was locked up for what in Washington State was juvenile life at the time, which means he was incarcerated until he was a 21-year-old man. And I remember like this visit I had with my brother. I walked into this facility. It was called Maple Lane. Now, most of these facilities across the nation are named after places that feel like country clubs, right? Like in Washington State, we had Maple Lane, that's gone, but then you got Echo Glen, you got Green Hill. It feels like someplace you might summer at. Like, where do you summer? Oh, at Green Hill. Oh, at Echo Glen. No, at Maple Lane. That's where we play tennis. No, these are not places that you want to go to. And they're not named this way for the benefit of the young people. They're named this way for the benefit of the people who work there. So they don't got to say, why, where do you work at? I work at the kid jail. What, you work at a kid jail? Yeah, that's literally what you do, but you call it Maple Lane instead. I digress. So I went into this facility and I walk up to the tower to let them know where who I'm going to see, and they point to an article on the wall behind me, and it's an article about my brother, and it's an article not about what he did that got him into this situation, but what he's done since he's been in this situation. And it was a school that he went to go speak at, and it was talking about how inspirational he was. But then after he got done speaking, he had to come right back into this place that he couldn't leave until he was a 21-year-old man because of a poor choice he made when he was a 13-year-old boy. And it wasn't lost on me then, and it's not lost on me now, that we are on the daily incarcerating so many possibilities that simply haven't been put in a position to live into their fullest potential because the environment that they're growing up in aren't conducive to seeing them as they really can be, because we're too busy stigmatizing them for the things that they may have done. Now, fortunately for me, when my brother got released at 21, I was about 13 and starting to get into the life. And what he could tell from the clothing I was wearing, the colors, the people I was hanging out with, things that my mother couldn't recognize. And so as a credible messenger, he was able to speak into my life in a way that nobody else was able to speak into my life and help me commit to a new direction. Now, I wish I could tell you that like from there, it was all roses and rainbows and nothing but Lucky Charms at the end. That is far from the case. But what these experiences in life have grounded me in is this principle that there's people who are typically throwaway people through the eyes of society. And that these throwaway people aren't reclamation projects. Like Shaka is not a reclamation project. Shaka is doing us a favor by giving society a chance to let his brilliance be seen and viewed in this way. We did a great disservice to Shaka throughout the course of his life to minimize his brilliance by virtue of the fact that he was born into a particular ethnicity and socioeconomic status that limited the lens that people are willing to look at him because of their implicit bias. So we are not in service organizations doing something for young people. Young people are doing something for us. They're validating the fact that if they are simply seen and elevated and amplified as who they are, they can do magnificent things. And we know it's true because white kids across the country get the opportunity and the privilege to do it every single day. You know, when we have conversations about abolition, people ask questions like, well, what does that actually look like? And I paint them this picture, and it seems so abstract, of this place where there's limited involvement in law enforcement and families work things out between families and behaviors listened to and not criminalized. It's this mythical place called the suburbs. And you can envision a place like the suburbs, and you can envision what we're talking about when we're dreaming out loud. We can envision what my brother should have been embraced with instead of what he was engaged in. We can see what it was that I benefited from because my brother was able to see me as I was instead of what I was doing. And the fruit that comes from that as I'm able to steward this organization in the way that I am. All right, so that's what brought me into this work. That's the passion that drives me every day. I am constantly looking my brother in the eye, not in person, but through my heart, because I know he is with me as I step into the space. And I'm looking at all the young people and young adults that we're connected to in the same manner. That these are folks that many people have casted away, said that, well, we can't do anything with them, but can you? And instead of saying, well, look at how much brilliance and giftedness and talent and opportunity and possibility is here, and we can't seem to see it because we're too blind through the lens of the criminal justice system. Because candidly, Lady Justice is absolutely blind, but she can see one thing for certain, and that's through the lens of implicit bias.
Amazing. Thank you all for sharing your experience and your stories. Sean, you mentioned Maple Lane, you mentioned Green Hill, and Evergreen has had a relationship with both of those facilities back since 1996. Dr. Carol Menu, an Evergreen alum, Evergreen faculty at the time, started the Gateways for Incarcerated Youth program. It brought cultural groups and then started bringing college class. And we've been doing that since 1996. I was fortunate to teach that a few years ago. We bring Olympia students, Evergreen Olympia students, into the facility once a week. And it's a pop ed model, participatory action research, sort of peer-to-peer learning, and the youth do workshops in partnership with Olympia students and Chehalis students. So I know what you're talking about with that name. People think, oh yeah, Green Hill. No, I have to explain. Green Hill is that prison you see on the way to Portland. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. It's a frightening place from the outside. And Danielle typed into the chat that you all have Greenhaven in New York. And that's the first place I taught in prison for the Barred Prison Initiative, was in Greenhaven. And Greenhaven has the exact same architectural blueprint as Attica, which one of the students I was working with was sure to draw to my attention on my first day of class. And that completely changed my understanding of the names, and then the places, and then just that you could have multiple structures of that sort dotted across the state. Absolutely beautiful surroundings, and then just these horrifying walls. Anyway, I'm taking a lead from Sean and digressing myself. I think, well, I know that there are several good questions coming in on the Q&A. I would encourage more questions to come there. We'll be able to turn to them in about 15 minutes or so, I think. I wanted to shift into some more focused questions, and I've got one focused question for each of you. I think we'll start up with Danielle. We'll just keep our sequence going. And so, Danielle, there's often an assumption that survivors favor more punitive responses, that punishment in prison is what victims say they want. So can you talk about what your experience in this work teaches us about that assumption, that story that we tell?
Yeah, we do so much in survivors' names. Like, we name laws after them, we impose extraordinary sentences, we increase sentencing minimums, we increase maximums, and we resist reforms, and we say we're doing that for victims. But rarely do we actually listen to them. And I said earlier when I was describing the program that we only take people into common justice if the survivors of those crimes agree. And so it's important to remember fewer than half of survivors of violence call the police in the first place. So shame on us if we want to pretend that system is victim-centered, when 50% when I was in school was an F. And so, like, you're starting there. Within half of people who have been rendered unconscious, people who've suffered serious harm, serious injury, prefer nothing to everything that system has on offer. Another half of those will drop out of the process before grand jury. So they'll call the police in a moment of crisis, but will not want to proceed through the court process. So that's 75% of victims who have already said to us, this system we have available, the end point of which is mass incarceration, is not for us. It does not meet our needs for all sorts of reasons. At Common Justice, it's then we only take cases that have been indicted, because in an alternative to incarceration, we are looking to work with the people who are likely to be incarcerated, but for our intervention. And we reach out to the victims of those crimes. So not the 50% who didn't call, not the 50% who dropped out, but the people who have stayed in that system, arguably the jailingest subset of victims you'll find. And we say to them, do you want the person who hurt you in common justice, or do you want them in prison? And 90% choose common justice, 90%. It's a wild number. And when I first started to see that number, I thought, like, we people are better than I knew. Like, we're merciful, we're forgiving. We think, but for the grace of God, go I. I was very encouraged. And I don't think I was exactly right. I think that was true in maybe 25, 30% of the cases. But the rest of the people who said yes for reasons that I should know as a survivor myself. And the best way I have found to describe this over the years is that as survivors, we will feel pain so deep, we would like wring out our bones in case we could be free from it in like the marrow there. And we feel fear like so intrusive that in the safety of our own homes, in the arms of the people we love the most, we will be unable to sleep. And when exhaustion finally takes us, we will wake from that sleep with nightmares over and over, and we will feel rage so all consuming it makes us unrecognizable even to ourselves. But at the end of the day, like, we are pragmatic, and as survivors there are two things we cannot stand. We cannot stand the idea of going through it again, and we cannot stand the idea of someone else going through it. That second part is actually a testament to our shared humanity in ways the mercy part wasn't as real. We can't abide it. And so if we're given a choice, we're going to choose the things that prevent the two things we cannot stand. And the hardest people to persuade that incarceration is common are people who live in neighborhoods, or that incarceration will work, are people who live in neighborhoods where incarceration is common. They have paid the price of prison's failure to produce safety with their ongoing pain. Like, if prison worked, East New York, Brooklyn would be the safest place ever to have existed in all of human history. Like, the United States would be the safest country in all of human history, as I said before, for the rate at which we've been incarcerated. And the Black and brown neighborhoods where we have concentrated this brutal enforcement would be like bastions of safety. They'd be little mini gardens of Eden. They'd be places where if someone accidentally ran over a cat, there had to be a community vigil because that kind of loss was so rare, right? Incarceration does not produce safety. And people who live in neighborhoods where incarceration is the norm know that, not because they read a book about prison being criminogenic or follow Michelle Alexander in the New York Times or have like a really good Twitter algorithm, but because their day-to-day experience affirms over and over the reality that that is not how safety is made. And so when presented with an option, they choose a different option. And it's not necessarily because they hate incarceration, because they love reform, because they're curious about something new and different. I've likened it to like if you had excruciating migraines for years and you went to your doctor and your doctor said, there's this experimental new treatment. So far, it has really incredible results and almost no serious side effects. Are you interested? You would probably say yes. And you wouldn't say yes because you'd always wanted to be part of a clinical trial. Like, you would say yes because the pain that you were currently experiencing was not pain you could continue to endure. And so you would choose the thing that you thought could possibly relieve it. And so for our survivors who choose common justice, it is because the thing they are currently experiencing is not endurable. And so they choose something different in a way that is rooted in pragmatism. And I think one of the mistakes we make when we think about the scale of reform efforts, first, that we make the horrible mistake of assuming survivors oppose it when that could not be further from the truth. And we lose a central constituency who has one of the deepest, arguably deepest stake in whether or not we develop systems that actually end violence. But we also assume that people, in order to support reform, have to be merciful, like have to want to embrace somebody like their brother and care about everyone the way they care about themselves. I would love that for our world. It is not a prerequisite for ending mass incarceration, right? Like, the prerequisite for ending mass incarceration is that we act pragmatically, that we decide to do what works instead of what fails. Like that we do things that are in our self-interest instead of things that are in the interest of elected officials who are answering to a constituency other than those people who will be impacted by their choices. So like, we know as people in the business of ending violence, so the core drivers of violence are structural. They're poverty, they're inequity, they're racism, they are a lack of access to housing, to schooling, to medical care, all of those things. But on an individual level, the reason someone in one community might commit harm when another doesn't, the drivers of violence are shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. And the core features of prison are shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. And so we are responding to violence with exactly the things that generate it, like showing up at a house fire with a hose full of gasoline. Survivors are the residents of those houses. Like, why would they choose the gas? Right? Like, survivors will choose water if you offer it every single time. And I think it's one of the most important lessons for us as we understand not only why someone might participate in restorative justice or an alternative to incarceration, but about who we can animate to support a broader movement to end the use of prisons in our lifetimes.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump to Shaka with another focus question. And as you guys hear each other, you're welcome to fold in, as you wish. You can do as you've always done with the questions I'm posing. So Shaka, the criminal justice system teaches people about accountability to the court, accountability to judges, accountability to prosecutors. But the model that you've described, common justice model, a restorative justice model, is about accountability to the people who've been harmed. And so in your work with the responsible parties, how do you support them in shifting that focus of their accountability away from the system, the court system, and toward the harmed parties in the case?
Thank you. So, I mean, the way that that question is kind of odd, because the only thing I'm thinking about, like when you're asking me that question, is that our participants are still obligated to show up to court and respond to the courts, and there's still things like they can't leave the 5 boroughs. Like, they still have responsibilities to fulfill that, the courts like obligated with the courts. So I wouldn't say that we so much like try to shift them away from those responsibilities, but we kind of, I would more so say we help them to basically manage both, and not dismiss the fact that what you're mainly here for is to, that piece of accountability towards the harm party, towards the person that allowed you to be in this this program. It's like Danielle said, they have to say that I'm cool with this. It's like my responsible party. I'm sorry, harm party. It's like my harm party. They had to say, hey, I agree with Shaka coming to this program. I don't want him to be incarcerated. I want him to do what he has to do in order to make sure that I'm able to heal from the pain that he caused me. So it's basically helping them to realize that, hey, this person gave you a chance. They believe that you made a mistake, and they're willing to come to terms with you on how to rectify this mistake, and how to help them to feel better about what transpired. The whole, the point of it is we help them to realize this. It doesn't, regardless if you complete the program or if you show up to court every day, you complete the agreements, you do everything right, it's not going to change what happened. It's not going to change the harm that you caused this person. The harm is still done. I often think about, almost like, once a week, or probably more than that, I think about the harm that I caused my harm party, often. And it hurts me, and I feel like a sucker for what I did, often. But like I said, things happen. And like, I think about how they, allowed me to get through the program. And I think about, did I do enough when I was in the program? Did I show sorry enough? And I bring this up to my participants. I talk to them about, how I felt about my situation, because I feel that's helpful for them to hear that, and it helps them to open up about, if they feel right about, if they're doing the right thing to show that they were sorry. Do they agree with just if sometimes our participants don't it takes some coming around for them to see that the harm that they actually caused, because they're like, oh, well, this person did this. Because, in a situation, we have to be honest. There's two sides. There's a cause and effect. Sometimes the harm party may have done something too that caused this whole situation to spiral out of control, and sometimes it's hard to get sometimes it's hard to get the harm party to see that, that, oh, you can't just focus on what this person did to you. At the end of the day, you got caught for this. You did the worst harm in this situation, which caused you to be on, for lack of better term, like, you're kind of the bad guy in the situation, because you got caught, you caused this person the most harm, and they're the person that was hurt. regardless of whatever happened in the beginning. So you gotta like shift them from that thinking. They'll think about the situation, about what happened, and they'll think like, oh, but they did this to me. So you got to kind of like, all right, you talk to them about that, like, all right, they did that to you, but then you bring that from like, all right, what happened after? How did you retaliate? What decision did you make after that certain thing happened? And then once they go from that to like, well, I kind of did do this thing where, that was probably kind of wrong for me to do. I probably shouldn't have retaliated like that. You bring them to a sense of what could you have done better in that situation. And once they understand that, like, oh, maybe I could have walked away, maybe I could have did this different, maybe I could have did that different. It helps them to better understand, like, hey, I really have to take responsibility for what I did. I can't worry too much about what, you can worry, you can think about the entire situation as a whole because it's very important. And that's also what you're in common justice for, is to address the harm, which is that's harm too in a way, but you really like the base of this whole thing is for you to really just acknowledge the harm that you caused this person, and to really just you have to thank them in a way for giving you that second chance, which leads me into the court piece, which why the court piece is important too. Like, they gave you that second chance to be able to continue to not only go to the program, but to appear in court and show that I'm learning from this, I'm doing better. I learned this from common justice. This is how we've been rectifying this situation. So I just say that to say like both pieces are important, the core piece and the rectifying the harm party. Making sure that they get the healing that they need as well. But yeah, that's basically how I do. I just talk to them about that, help them to get to see like that part. The part of the harm party. They give them a second chance, and usually like once you get them to that point of understanding, it's a lot easier, and they're able to show up to both a lot better. They're able to do both a lot better. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it.
Amazing. I'm hearing complexity, but I'm also hearing compassion and patience, and almost a project of inviting inquiry, inviting analysis and interpretation and reflection. Yeah, thank you for sharing such detail in terms of that process, and then reminding us that it's still, the court's still there, that there's this other paradigm of restoration that's at the core of this model. I'm going to jump to Sean now, and so we're getting a lot of information on this call, and we have a lot of information beyond this call that restorative solutions work. But then we also know that there's a kind of political gap, like the political will isn't there. And so a question here would be, what does the movement need? How do we make our knowledge common? How do we circulate and contribute to much wider engagement with this kind of process?
I get the easy question. Got it. No worries. Simple. Let me say two things real quick that I want to make sure that weren't lost as we continue to move through these panel questions. First, that Shaka spoke brilliantly to the reality that hurt people. And we know that, right? I mean, in our communities, the person who's the harm party one day is the accused the next day, right? And like the cycle only continues until we begin to heal, which is why when we have verdicts like the Derek Chauvin trial, like I don't get excited because like I know there's no healing that's actually taking place. What we have is more incarceration that's going to cause more woundedness and ultimately more harm because the healing hasn't manifested itself. So we desperately need to orient ourselves through a lens of healing, and healing as a priority. And healing requires restoration instead of retribution. And so like a model of restoration that puts healing at the forefront instead of a practice of retribution that was only looking for like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And the challenge with the criminal legal system as it exists, and Danielle painted a picture of this perfectly, is that people who have been impacted and have been harmed, I've been harmed. I remember when my father got taken away in handcuffs for domestic violence. And then when he came back, he wasn't any less wounded. He just had a restraining order. So he was legally mandated to stay away until that restraining order expired. And then he was right back at our house again, right? And so like, there wasn't a healing that took place. There was no benefit to engaging law enforcement. And candidly, if we look at what's called clearance rates nationally, you know, law enforcement isn't solving crime, and which means they're not resolving cases, which means they're not bringing healing and wholeness at any level, even if we were to suppose that the court system somehow does that, somehow rehabilitates and somehow restores. I mean, the only national average that's above 50% is murder cases. And that's only 60%. That's only 60% nationally. Think about that. 6 out of 10 times, 4 out of 10 times, those cases aren't solved at all. And when you get to the things that are most common, like thefts and assaults, we're talking about the teens. We're talking about like 10%, 15%, 18%. And yet, this is where we invest so many of our resources to somehow curb these things from occurring when they're not actually solving for the things when they happen. They're just showing up and candidly giving peace of mind, not even to those who are impacted, but to those that will never be impacted. The criminal legal system as it exists today only exists to help those who would never will and never have to actually activate it. It creates this narrative that there's something operating in the background 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that will keep us safe from those criminals that have come to steal, kill, and destroy. And it's the farthest thing from the truth. So what do we need in this moment? What we need is the power of the collective us. There is no greater power than the collective us. When we begin to mobilize and come together with the voice of synergy and sing a song in a similar tone with similar words and a similar cadence and amplify it across the country, we see how things move and we see how things shift. The issue is when it comes to the culminating moments, it shows up similar to a Sunday service because after the altar call, everybody wants to go home, disperse, and get on with the rest of their lives. But we need to stop waiting for climactic moments for these voices and words to resonate. We have to continue to carry this chorus forward so that way we don't find ourselves in these lulls of a movement waiting for the next Black man to get assassinated by a police officer. I mean, think about this. I just read it this morning that the young man, when he was 14, who was sentenced to life, who is the reason why the Superior Court said that we need to consider youthfulness, had his trial reconsidered by a judge in Alabama now that he's an adult. And the judge said that he does not believe that he can be rehabilitated and he'll have to serve his life sentence. The judge himself said he does not believe the system of rehabilitation is able to rehabilitate, therefore he needs to spend the entirety of his life within the system. We have people who are operators within the equation that are indicting themselves based upon the way that they operate. What that means is they need an out. They desperately want it out, but we need to create the landscape for them to exit out of the trajectory that they're caught in. And that's where our collective voice makes a difference. That's where our political power makes a difference. That's when we begin to put people into positions of political power and hold them accountable. That makes a difference. And I'll say this last thing, which I think is the greatest transformative opportunity in front of us as we share space on this panel virtually in this moment called now. So often we look at justice and we talk about justice, and really we talk about it in the wrong way, first of all. We say we want justice. What we really are saying is we want judgment because we want finality. We want a period. We want it to be over. Justice is not a destination. It's where we can just get to there and be done, right? Justice is a pursuit because we're constantly in a pursuit of becoming more just. Now, if we're constantly in pursuit of becoming more just and it's not a destination, then we can't look at it as a linear path to a place that we're going where one day we'll soon arrive and say, look at everybody, we're here. This is what justice is. We've arrived at justice. It won't happen. But what we can do is instead of looking at this journey that we're on as a linear path, look at it like concentric circles, where justice is at the core. And every day we're traveling, we're working to become more just as a people, more just in our responses, more just in the way that we see each other, talk to each other, engage each other. So that way, everything we do is done in a pursuit of becoming more just, and therefore we live in a more just society. I tell people all the time, the biggest gap between where we are today and living in a place of abolition is not law enforcement. It's not our court system. It's the fear that we hold unnecessarily towards one another, because somewhere embedded in our psyche is this notion that you are going to do harm to me if I don't have some sort of recourse. And that is embedded in us because we're wounded and we haven't began a healing process. And when we don't heal, then we harm, and we harm by activating 911. We harm by distancing ourselves from others we should be in relationship with. We harm in a variety of different ways that have residual impact that then make us complicit to the very systems that we aspire to abolish. So my call for everybody is we ask, what do we need? We need the collective us to lift this movement up and forward. We need to be in pursuit of justice, not as a destination, but as a way of being. And we need in ourselves in our pursuit of justice to honor our shared humanity in every aspect of our walk in life.
Beautiful. Thank you. Some of what you're saying reminds me of Ruth Wilson Gilmore's reminder that abolition is not just about taking something away. It's actually a creative theory of change, and it's a lived experience of change. I'm hearing you talk, Sean. I'm thinking of some of the detail that Shaka was able to offer about, well, how does that process work? What happens when you do step out of the given paradigm, and what does that look like? And I hear that as that creative theory of change. And I hear it also in relation to what Danielle was offering, a kind of systems perspective. But both of you were offering, Sean and Danielle were offering statistics, right? And that's one of the first things you learn. You start doing mass incarceration stuff, you have to start learning about rates of incarceration, right? How many per 100,000? And you start suddenly, getting a kind of statistical mindset or mentality, but then that's combined with these human stories. And if what we want to do is erode those statistics, which are just like a juggernaut, just this clockwork. Danielle, I think, said that no culture on earth has ever tried anything like mass incarceration. And if our project then is mass decarceration, well, we're going to have to figure out how to do that in a way that's creative and skillful. And I know we have our work cut out for us. Go for it, Danielle.
So I want to offer one thing, which is that I echo everything about the imaginative requirement, right, of building the future that we want, like completely. And I think that can make it feel more difficult than it is. So the day I was born, by my best estimates, there were 443,850 people locked up in the US. Like there are 2.3 million today. To get to zero, we are going to have to do all that labor of imagination that everybody is calling into that space. To get to 443,850, which is a bigger reduction than almost anybody is putting on the table, right? Like people are like, we're going to reduce it by half, and they seem super bold, and half still concedes a threefold increase in my lifetime, which, despite the opinions of the adolescents we work with, is not actually that long. And so the thing we have to do to get to 443,850 is like to remember the late 70s, right? It's not actually this like grand imaginative blank slate project. Like the policy roadmap are the sentencing policies we had in place in very recent history. And so I think it's important that we really hold the both and of like the transformative work of becoming a culture that doesn't center punishment, that doesn't center the control and subjugation of Black people and other people of color. Like that is transformative work. The labor of just reducing the number of people behind bars, which has transformative effect, is actually like can be very mechanical work. And the policy platforms that achieve that are ones that have existed very recently. And so I think it's important that we don't get too caught up in the notion that we are burdened with a responsibility to envision something that has never existed. And I would add, like Sean is like, if you want to look for where these things are happening, look at the suburbs. And I think there's a lot, the way the state relates to people in the suburbs is a model for how the state can relate to people. The way people relate to each other, I think one of the things people of color, the one thing I think people of color often get wrong about white people is that people of color overestimate how kind we are to each other. Like the shit we build into systems, we do in our own families. Like we carry it out. And I think it's sort of hard to imagine that if you had that much power, you would exert that same kind of destructive force against your own. It's just we do it interpersonally. We don't ask the systems to do it on our behalf usually, but we still carry out that same ethos of white supremacy over and over. I was talking to an incredible historian, Khalil Muhammad, and sort of checking. I was like, I think the 4 core modes of white supremacy are to control, to punish, to exile, and to exterminate. Like, would you agree with those? And Khalil was like, yep, I agree with that. And I was like, I came to that by just looking at the patterns in my family, like how my family has treated the like least among us. And he got so mad because he's like, I had to study 500 years of history and you're behind, just had to look at the white people around you. Hardly fair. But I think it's really important that we not that we not center the suburbs as the dream in a certain respect, because I think the place where we see like the most transformative healing work are primarily in communities of color. Like what we know about how cycles of violence work, the amount of violence inflicted on communities of color over centuries and centuries, there is almost nothing in the research and the psychological literature anywhere to explain why anyone is still here. Like why anyone is still alive, why anyone doesn't pick up a gun, why anyone feels love and joy and compassion and care, which is what the vast, vast majority of people do. It's even what the vast majority of people who commit violence do. Like most of the time, they're not committing violence. Most of the time, they're loving other people. They're showing up for the people they love. They're doing some, they're smoking weed and cheating on their girlfriends, but they're not mostly committing violence. And so I think there are also really profound models for healing work and for accountability work that are everywhere. And we don't have to pretend we have to imagine them from scratch. We have to we have to weed the garden, right? We have to remove the intrusions of state violence that choke out the ability of those things indigenous to that place and its ability like to draw on the sustenance that exists there and to thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we've got about 14 minutes left. I like to stop right on time. So we'll stop at 1 p.m. Pacific time, which is 4 o'clock over there for you East Coasters. I'm going to pull in one of the questions that have been posed. And the questioner says, I have what might be an unpopular question, but it comes out of several community restorative processes I've been involved in, and which have become extremely muddled and complicated. I am wondering how you define what is a dignified restorative process and what you do if both parties cannot come to agreement, or if the surviving party is seeking a type of restorative procedure that the other party feels is unfair or manipulative. So unpopular question, it's the one I'm going to bring in and put on the table, not least because I've heard it a lot. This is not the first time I've heard this question.
I just finished a whole tirade, so I'm stepping back. If you want to tag me in, you can, but
Yeah, Dan, I was gonna, the majority of our work isn't does not involve the harm party in the way that that both Shaka and Danielle's work does, and so it would make more sense for them to answer this question. So I'm gonna punt to Shaka, or if you think that you want to answer, whichever way you'd like to go.
I mean, the other way I might put it would be, what's a key ingredient in common justice's paradigm?
So yeah, I don't think that's the same question. I want to welcome this question. I think it's important. It's important we're honest about it. Like it's not like you all sit in circle, you pass the stick, sacred shit happens, all is well every time. Like that's not the case. Like we still live in this country. We still live on like in an unreckoned for genocide and like the continuation. Like there's a continual onslaught of pain, of extraction, of everything all the time. And it takes more than passing a stick around a room for everybody to transform permanently. And so we don't have to pretend that these processes are perfect and that they always work. I mean, at Common Justice, 100% of our circles have resulted in agreements. And I'll say a little about why and then kick it to Shaka to talk about what some of those elements look like. But I think that you have some of it is about the question of motivation, like why are people in the room? Like what is the moral force that keeps them there? If that's not a threat of the state, is it about the moral authority of the community? Is it about the importance of their belonging? Is it about their sense of their own reputation? Is it about an actual sense of a moral desire to repair? But like what actually has somebody in there matters a great deal. Like what is the binding force in that space matters a great deal. Who is in that space matters a great deal. Like who do they feel answerable to? And is that person present? You know, Shaka talked earlier about how important support people are, but like the circle is made up of whoever is in the circle, you know, and if you're lucky, some chairs. And so like who is in that circle is everything. And so the importance of having the right people there in right relationship in that circle is incredibly important to those processes. They still won't all work. I think we get pushed to be perfect as though the system we're replacing is perfect. And so we have to be as good. Even when we are a train wreck, we are better. Because even in those terrible muddled processes, it's almost certain the facilitator is not going to like beat one of the participants within an inch of their lives, which is what would happen if we turn to incarceration. So we also have to hold that even our muddled processes are better. And then I would say a really critical component is the preparatory process. And that's the thing I would love to kick to you, Shaka, to talk about. Like, we don't put people in a circle until they're ready. I do not know anything I have ever witnessed in my life more powerful than a circle. Like, it is like, I would go to that church every day if I could, you know, like it is extraordinary. And it doesn't do every single thing, right? And so we're also really mindful about like when someone is ready in that space. And that is both the responsible party and the harm party. Like both parties could be unprepared for the circle. And so Shaka, I wonder if you might talk some about like how that preparation works and like what you see that makes you think somebody's ready for a circle, you know, and what you do, like what you see that tells you they're not ready, you know, and what you do when you see that, like how we think about preparation and circle readiness.
Thank you, Danielle. So first thing I want to say about the circle is once it comes time like for someone's circle to come up, they're usually like very anxious about it. But they always say that they're ready, mainly because they just want to like get to the next thing. So they be like, "I gotta get this program out the way." But there's like a lot of anxiety, which is why like it's very important that we do have like these preparatory like talks. We have like in the prep curriculum, we have like I believe it's 2 sessions that's dedicated. It might be 3, but we have a couple sessions that's dedicated just to talk about, you know, about the harm that was caused, again, because that's going to come up in the circle, and to just to talk about the circle, what to expect, you know, how are you going to feel if the harm party shows up? This is someone that you got a little, you know, problem with right now, or you had a problem with. So like how are you going to feel when you have to face them again? Do you feel like it might trigger like some type of emotions? Like, just, you know, try to think about that in your head. Like, I'll tell them that. Think about what it will be like to see them in the room again. What kind of emotions do you feel right now in that second thinking about that? And, you know, this might say like, oh, you know, I feel like okay with that. I just, you know, I want to get this over with. I don't feel like any type of anxiety. That may be true. Or they might be like, hey, I feel really just, I think I might be really stressed out. I don't know if I'm be able to hold myself back when it comes to talking about certain things. If the situation comes up and they explain a certain type of way that I don't agree with, I might just feel like, you know, interrupting them and interjecting, you know, punch them in the face because they lying or something, you know, something like that. So really just getting them like just mentally prepared, like just talking to them about the circle process, talking to them about the, hey, are you more comfortable with the harm party or with a surrogate, you know, being that person to represent, which, you know, is not up to them, but it's just like, again, preparing them for the possibilities of what might be. Because sometimes we might not know yet, like if the harm party might comes, and the harm party might be like, hey, I feel just as uncomfortable seeing this person again as they do seeing me. And they might not even want to show up, which is something that happened to me. I had a surrogate. Um, but really just preparing them to seeing the harm party again, preparing them um, to talk about that situation again, and not only talk about that situation, but to talk about it in front of the person that was involved. You know, it's very, very. I can't describe how just like anxious you get just being not even being in that situation yet, but just thinking about being in that situation. It's just like really crazy because this is how I got here. Now I have to revisit it. You know. So yeah, just talking them through that. Something I also do with my participants is when it comes time for the agreements, I'd be like, hey, all right, so let's come up with, but before the circle starts, let's come up with a list of agreements together. Let's come up with like a 15 or 20, just so we have those things to throw out, just so we know that, just so we're able to identify what you are and what you aren't comfortable with. And the way that I would do that is, you know, I'll go back into like maybe my old agreements, look into like some other agreements just to throw out some ideas like, oh, I did this back in the day. This person did this. This person did this. Da da da. Community service. Da da da. How many hours are you comfortable with? Just to see like what they're comfortable with, because these things they're gonna come up. And the community service is gonna come up in the circle. You might have to do 20, 15, 20, 30 hours. You might have to write a children's book. You might have to do this. Like just the wackiest things might come up. But at the end of the day, these are the things that we feel that are going to rectify, the situation that happened, the harm that the harm party felt. So really just talking them through that, which is something that I think is very helpful, because when you go in just with like a list of things to throw out, you don't feel like just attacked with a bunch of things, because that can easily happen. It could just easily feel like, oh, well, I have nothing past. Well, I think Shaka should do this. And then it goes back around and, it's like, I think Shaka do community service. Like, I didn't know anything about community service. Well, that's where that list that we come up with together comes in. It's just getting them prepared as much as possible. Let them know everything, every single possibility. Like anything that can happen in a circle, I will let them know, especially since, I've been through it myself before. Anything, like I don't want any loose ends. I don't want them to feel like surprised by anything. I'll let them know like, hey, we're here to just, make sure that the situation gets rectified the best way possible. And like, that's the best you can hope for. But like the way that I guess I will really just know when they're ready is it's hard to say, like you can't know for sure. But I guess like after that initial talking, like you just like kind of feel where they're at with it. Like you'll get to a point where like they'll be like, you know what, I'm ready. I feel like I can do this. I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Sometimes it comes up to that, because like they'll never be ready for it. So it's like, I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Let's just do it now. And, you got to take their word for it sometimes and be like, all right, I believe in you, but just know I got your back in this. I'm in your corner in this. I'm not biasly, but as support, because we have worked together up until now. We will continue to work together after this, and just know that you are able to bring these other these support people with you to this, so that you're able to have that support as well. So just making them feel like they're not alone. That's the main thing. Like you don't want to feel alone. You don't want to feel attacked. You don't want to feel like everyone's just coming at you because you made this big mistake and like you're the big bad guy in this situation. I was like, oh, you got to do this, this, and this now to appease this guy or this woman to make them feel better. So really just the comfortability aspect, letting them know that they're not a villain, that they're a person that made a mistake, and this is a part of the process. And like once they've got that message across, usually like it's we have our little hiccups in the circle sometimes, but usually like once they're able to get through it, they're able to just do everything that they have to do after that, So as long as you're able to break that stuff down really easily for them, or like not easily, but like well for them, like it's gonna be as smooth as it's gonna be. It's gonna be as smooth as it can.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that detail. And I'm hearing acts of imagination when you're making that list. When you're making that list for the agreement, like what could go on that list, and I'm also hearing community. I'm also hearing the de-isolation of an individual. And one thing that students came up with last quarter in this class, they were like, I get it why this class is called Reimagining Community Safety, but I think what we really need to talk about is reimagining community. And Shaka, what you've been describing, I'm hearing an active reimagination of community right there. And guys, we're just at 12:59. I think we should just have a standing date every Wednesday. I know you guys are incredibly busy. I can't thank you enough for your contributions, for your work. I don't know, lightning round, last words. Anything at all?
I would just like, what I'd offer is that it's important that work like ours exists, and we also have to change the material conditions that our young people and families are living in. That what we're combating is a disease of violence, and if young people continue to go home to places that foster the spread of the disease, we're constantly engaged in an uphill battle. And so it's abolishing the criminal legal system as it exists today, and it's making sure we're resourcing community develop in a way that's not centered around capitalism, but centered around a worldview that allows all to stand with dignity and have access to what's necessary to be healthy, happy, and whole.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean. Shaka, go for it.
No, I was gonna say definitely agreeing with everything Sean just said. Again, just thank you for having me here. So grateful to be here and be able to speak about the work that all of us do. And I just want to leave off with this. You don't have to be in this field to just talk to people, engage with people. Um, just meet people where they're at, like, and understand what people have been through, because it goes a long way. Some people don't have anyone just asking them, how's your day going? Some people are walking out to just frowns every day, and it makes them feel a way. It makes them feel like they're not worth anything and they're less than nothing. So, I challenge everyone, just go out, say hello, smile at, just smile at someone. Sometimes that just makes someone's day. Meet people where they're at, and like if someone wants to vent or something, you have a moment to listen, you should, whether you agree or disagree, just listen to people. That's all I want to say. And thank you again, everyone, for having me.
And I would just echo the like deep gratitude to all of you. Like all of you were here, to the whole team who organized it, including everybody who is like secretly behind the scenes, making all this magic happen, and like all the invisible labor that supported it. And I would just offer, I think one of like the greatest harms our criminal justice system does is that it continually tries to teach us that we don't know what to do. Like we don't know what to do about the harm that arises between us. Like we don't know how to solve problems. Like we don't know how to heal. And we know what to do. And we at least know better than that system does. And so to really, like to Shaka's point, like practice where you are, practice with the people you love, like build from there. If you are in striking distance of Choose 180, throw your weight behind them. If you're not close, throw your money behind them, like just like, so both like give on a movement level, and also just like be in those concentric circles that Sean described, like be in relationship in a way that like lives these values every day. And that means like not battling people on Twitter to prove who's a better abolitionist. It means like, because if we're abolitionists, we're not gonna be able to throw people away. So like if you're not talking to someone for something they tweeted 6 months ago, like you ain't ready for a world without prisons, right? Like we hold each other close, like we build with each other. And like it's ours to lose, and so let us win.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for your beautiful words. Thank you for your beautiful work. I've learned so much, and I think I probably owe everybody 3 minutes now. So 3 times 57 plus all of you. I'll see you next time, and I'll give you your minutes back. Thank you so much for your time. Big rounds of applause, and see you all next time.